You ever have an idea so good you can feel it thrumming in your veins, like it's part of your DNA? Mine came to me at 3 a.m., scrawled across coffee-stained napkins and the back of unpaid bills. It was the kind of idea that would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire industry. I poured 2 years of my life into it. Skipped birthdays, slept on the office floor, ate instant noodles until my bones ached. I built it from nothing. And then they came. My so-called partners. The ones I trusted. The ones I let in. They smiled while they gutted me, took my prototype, slapped their names on it, and told the world it was theirs. They sued me to bury me, to make sure I could never touch what I'd created again. But they didn't know I kept everything. Every email. Every late-night text. Every file. They wanted to play legal warfare? Fine. But I wasn't coming to court just to win. I was coming to end them. They say every entrepreneur remembers the moment they knew their life was about to change. For me, it was a Tuesday. Not the cinematic kind of Tuesday, either. No glowing sunrise over the city skyline, no high-energy startup office with cold brew on tap. Just me in my apartment, in a pair of sweatpants that had seen better decades, staring at my laptop with the intensity of someone trying to will a dead battery back to life. But there it was, my idea. Not half-baked, not some vague what-if scribble, but a fully fleshed out, tangible, beautiful beast of a concept. It came from months of little observations, frustrations, and late-night problem-solving that had finally collided into one perfect, revolutionary solution. I couldn't sit still. I printed mock-ups, sketched interfaces, made slides. I didn't eat for hours because my brain was feeding on adrenaline alone. This wasn't just going to work, it was going to blow up. That night, I called my best friend, Leo, to practice the pitch. He listened, went quiet, and then said words I didn't expect. Holy shit. This is it. You need help getting it off the ground. And I know people. And that's where my first mistake began. Leo's people turned out to be two guys, Damon and Chris. Both slick, sharp-dressed, and carrying the kind of confidence that only comes from either massive success or massive ego, or both. We met at a corner table in a dim restaurant where deals were made in whispers over whiskey. Damon leaned in, his cufflinks catching the candlelight. You've got something here. Something big. But if you want it to scale, you'll need funding. Infrastructure. Connections. That's where we come in. Chris smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached his eyes. And of course, he added, we'd be partners. Equal stake. My heart was pounding. It all felt so fast. But they talked about manufacturers, marketing teams, early investor interest, all the pieces I couldn't get on my own. It was intoxicating. By the time dessert hit the table, I had agreed to a preliminary partnership framework. We'd meet again to formalize everything. When I left that night, walking back through the neon glow of downtown, I remember thinking, this is it. This is how everything begins. What I didn't realize was that it was also how everything would end. The next meeting wasn't in a cozy restaurant. It was in Damon's glass-walled office, 40 stories above the city, where the air smelled faintly of money and legal ink. I'd never been in a place like that before, marble floors so polished you could check your teeth in them, receptionists who looked like they'd been cast from a luxury brand's advertising campaign, and silence so thick you could hear the click of expensive pens. Damon greeted me like an old friend, but Chris didn't even look up from his phone. On the table sat a stack of papers so thick it looked like it could stop a bullet. Damon slid them toward me with a pen that probably cost more than my laptop. Standard partnership agreement, he said casually, like he was offering me a menu. 50-50 split between the three of us. Equal votes. We handle the capital and operational resources, you bring the product. I picked up the first page. My name was in bold. My idea's name, my name for it, was right there too. It felt surreal, like seeing your own face on a billboard. But the legal jargon was dense. There were clauses about intellectual property ownership, non-compete agreements, and something called assignability, which Damon brushed off as just formalities. You have a lawyer who can review this? Damon asked, in a tone that made it sound like hiring one would be an overreaction. I didn't. I couldn't afford one. And they knew it. Leo nudged me under the table. These guys are legit, he whispered. Don't overthink it. So I signed. My hand was shaking, but I told myself it was excitement. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Damon and Chris moved fast. We had a logo, a website, and a polished pitch deck within days. They brought in designers, coders, and PR consultants. I was in meetings constantly, but every decision seemed to happen just before I got there. Don't worry, Chris would say with that flat smile. We're just streamlining things. One night, I stayed late in the office to finish some specs, and I saw Damon in the conference room with two men I didn't recognize. They had my mock-up spread out on the table, talking in low voices. When I walked in, the conversation stopped dead. Damon closed his laptop. Just running some numbers, he said smoothly. Go home, you look tired. That was the first time I felt it, the cold flicker of doubt in my gut. But it wasn't until a month later, when I saw a press release announcing their new product, that I realized the truth. They hadn't partnered with me. They had been stealing from me, piece by piece, and I had signed the papers to help them do it. The email came at 6:12 a.m. I was still half asleep, the light from my phone burning my eyes as I scrolled through the subject line again and again. Notice of breach, termination of partnership agreement. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I opened the attachment, my pulse thudding in my ears, and started reading. It was a legal letter, 4 pages long, written in the kind of cold, mechanical language that made me feel like my existence had been reduced to bullet points and numbered clauses. According to Damon and Chris, I had failed to fulfill key obligations outlined in our agreement. They were exercising their right to terminate my stake in the company and retain full ownership of all intellectual property, including my idea. Every word felt like a punch. They cited failure to meet development milestones, unauthorized alterations to project specifications, and communication breakdowns. All lies. But they had dates. Screenshots. Emails I'd never seen before, supposedly from me, authorizing changes I never approved. The kicker? There was a clause buried deep in the agreement, one I'd skimmed over, that said any partner removed for breach forfeited all rights, without compensation. I'd signed it. In Damon's office. With that stupid expensive pen. I called Leo immediately. His voice was groggy, but when I told him, there was no shock. Just a sigh. Listen. You're not going to win this. They've done this before. That was the moment I knew. He'd brought me to them because he was in on it. I hung up. I couldn't even feel anger yet, just a numb, hollow ache that spread from my chest to my fingertips. By noon, their lawyers had filed a cease and desist order. I was barred from using my own product name, from contacting their clients, from even discussing the concept in any professional setting. And then, like salt in the wound, I saw their social media announcement. Damon and Chris were on stage at a tech conference, holding my prototype, smiling like kings. The caption read, "The future starts here." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I dug through every folder, every backup drive, every scrap of paper from the last 2 years. I found the original timestamps of my designs, the drafts of my business plan, the early stage prototypes, proof. The more I dug, the more I found. And somewhere between the legal documents and the old emails, my grief boiled over into something else. They thought they'd taken everything from me. They had no idea I was just getting started. The launch party was held in one of those rooftop venues where the skyline looks like it's been painted just for the occasion. Golden light spilled across polished marble floors, champagne flutes clinked, and a live band played the kind of music that makes you feel underdressed no matter what you're wearing. I wasn't invited. I only knew it was happening because I saw a tagged post on social media, a glossy photo of Damon and Chris, each with an arm around a different investor, my prototype gleaming on a pedestal between them. The caption read, "Celebrating the launch of the product that will change the world." The product that was mine. I almost didn't go. I told myself it would just reopen the wound. But around 9 p.m., something in me snapped. I threw on a black jacket, grabbed my old messenger bag, the one that still smelled faintly of solder and coffee, and headed to the venue. I didn't need an invitation. I waited until a group of guests arrived and slipped in behind them. The doorman didn't even look at me. Inside, it was everything I'd imagined during those early, caffeine-fueled nights, except it wasn't mine anymore. My designs were everywhere, from the sleek branding on the banners to the carefully lit demo stations. Even the pitch being played on the massive screen was word for word from my original presentation. Except my name had been erased, replaced with Damon's smooth baritone voice. They saw me before I saw them. Chris was mid-laugh with a cluster of venture capitalists when his eyes locked on mine. The smile didn't falter, but it froze, the way a predator freezes when it realizes the prey has teeth. Damon noticed a second later. His smile did falter. I didn't approach them. I didn't cause a scene. I just walked the room, slowly, deliberately, taking everything in. Every face. Every handshake. Every conversation. And every time someone glanced at me curiously, I gave them the kind of nod that makes people wonder what you know. On my way out, I passed the product display. There it was, the culmination of years of my life, sitting under glass like some rare artifact. I leaned in close, almost touching the surface. Then I pulled a small flash drive from my pocket and slid it into the hidden port I'd built into the prototype months before. Just 5 seconds. That's all it took. No one noticed. By the time I stepped into the elevator, I knew exactly what my next move was going to be. They thought they'd taken everything from me that night. They were about to learn I'd taken something from them too. The first thing you learn about revenge is that it's not a sprint, it's a long, deliberate game. If you rush, you make mistakes. If you wait, you can make art. I spent 2 weeks building my case before I made a single move. Every night after work, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a pot of coffee, and a folder so thick it barely closed. The flash drive I'd plugged into the prototype at the launch party? It contained a hidden package, metadata logs, original development files, and encrypted documents, all with timestamped creation dates that proved I was the sole creator. I hadn't just designed the product, I'd architected the very bones of it. Damon and Chris could paint over the surface, but the skeleton was mine. And then there were the emails. The ones they'd deleted from our shared servers. I'd quietly set up an automated backup months before they cut me out. Their private discussions about squeezing me out before market launch were still sitting safely on my drive. The subject lines alone were damning. She's getting suspicious, we need to act fast. Get the IP transferred before she realizes. Once she's out, we can rebrand. I also had a secret weapon they didn't know about, Mia, one of the junior developers. She'd been brought on late in the process, and she'd watched them rewrite history in real time. She didn't like them, and she really didn't like what they'd done to me. She handed me her NDA and said, "Find a way around it, and I'll talk." So I did. By the time I walked into the office of Sloan & Meyer, one of the most aggressive intellectual property law firms in the city, I wasn't just a wrong partner. I was a loaded gun with a hair trigger. The senior partner, Sloan himself, read through my evidence with growing interest. When he finally looked up, there was a sharp gleam in his eye. "You're sitting on a gold mine. Not just for a countersuit, for a full claim of ownership. If we play this right, you don't just get damages. You get everything." 2 days later, the papers were filed. Damon and Chris were officially being sued for misappropriation of intellectual property, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. The court granted a temporary injunction, which meant they couldn't sell, license, or market the product until the case was resolved. I didn't serve them through the usual channels. I hired a process server to walk straight into their office during peak hours, right in the middle of a meeting with investors. The server dropped the thick, stapled packet on the table between them and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Consider yourself served." The silence that followed was delicious. Damon's face went pale. Chris's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. The investors excused themselves within minutes. And me? I was sitting in a coffee shop across the street, watching the whole thing through a pair of cheap binoculars. When the process server walked past my table, he gave me a little salute. That was the first day in months I actually smiled. Because now, it was my turn to put them on defense. Discovery is a beautiful thing. It's the part of a lawsuit where both sides are legally required to hand over every shred of evidence they have, emails, texts, internal documents, meeting notes, all of it. It's also where liars tend to hang themselves. My legal team and I sat in a conference room big enough to host a wedding reception. The walls were lined with bankers' boxes and hard drives, each one labeled in neat black Sharpie, Damon, Chris, company records. Sloan had warned me. They're going to bury us in paper. The trick is knowing exactly what to dig for. We started with the emails. Damon's were as arrogant as I remembered, full of jargon, backslapping, and casual dismissals of my contributions. But buried between the corporate fluff were gems. Once she's out, we can push launch without her approval. The patent filing will be in our names only. Delete the shared folder after you download the files, we don't want her sniffing around. She's too naive to fight us. Worst case, we settle for peanuts. Chris's correspondence was colder, more calculated. He had spreadsheets tracking my hours, deadlines, and deliverables, with deliberate edits making it look like I'd missed dates I'd actually hit early. There were even fake status reports he'd sent to investors claiming my work had to be completely redone by the team. But the pièce de resistance came from a chat log between Damon and a marketing consultant. The consultant had asked, "So who actually invented this thing?" Damon's reply, "Some girl. She's gone now. Doesn't matter." Oh, it mattered. Mia's testimony sealed the coffin. In her deposition, she described watching Damon and Chris replace my name with theirs on patent applications, rewriting my product manual, even rehearsing a fake origin story for investor meetings. She'd been ordered to shred physical copies of my original schematics, but she'd scan them first, just in case. Those scans were now sitting in our evidence pile. When our turn came to hand over documents, I watched Damon's attorney flip through my folder. I could see the moment his shoulders stiffened. We didn't just have proof. We had patterns. And patterns win cases. By the end of the day, the mood in their camp had shifted. Damon avoided eye contact entirely. Chris kept checking his phone like he was waiting for a lifeline that wasn't coming. Walking out of that room, I realized something important. They'd underestimated me because they thought revenge was about rage. It wasn't. Revenge was about patience. About precision. About letting your enemies dig their own graves, and then handing them the shovel. Depositions aren't like courtroom dramas on TV. There's no judge, no jury, no gavel slamming for order. Just a long table, a court reporter typing every word, and two lawyers waiting to see who blinks first. And for the first time since they stole everything from me, Damon and Chris had to sit across from me and talk. Under oath. Damon went first. He showed up in a tailored navy suit and a watch that probably cost more than my old car. His smirk was intact, but it was brittle now, the kind of smile that cracks if you stare too long. Sloan started simple. Mr. Carver, can you confirm that the initial prototype for this product was built prior to your involvement with Ms. Hale? Damon's smirk twitched. I don't recall the exact timeline. Let me refresh your memory, Sloan said smoothly, sliding a photo across the table. It was me, hunched over the first working version, timestamped 6 months before it even met Damon. Damon's lawyer objected. Overruled. From there, it was like watching a slow, satisfying collapse. Every lie Damon tried to spin, Sloan countered with a document, a timestamp, or one of Damon's own emails. By the third hour, Damon was sipping water like it was the only thing keeping him from drowning. Chris was worse. He had the self-control of a poker player until Sloan started asking about the fake performance reports. Mr. Vance, this spreadsheet shows that you altered Ms. Hale's completion dates. Why? I didn't alter anything. Would you like me to pull up the metadata from your own computer? Or should we go straight to the investor you sent it to? Chris's jaw worked like he was grinding glass between his teeth. I don't recall. Then perhaps this will help, Sloan said, clicking a remote. The TV in the corner flickered to life. Mia scanned copies of my original schematics, complete with my handwritten notes. The reporter kept typing. I kept my face neutral. Inside, I was savoring every crack in their armor. By the time their depositions ended, Damon was flushed and snappy, Chris was stone silent, and their lawyer looked like he was ready to bill triple his usual rate. When it was my turn, they tried to paint me as an unstable, over-emotional ex-partner. I didn't give them a single outburst. I answered every question calmly, clearly, and with receipts. Because I knew something they didn't, depositions aren't about winning in the room. They're about giving the other side just enough rope to hang themselves at trial. And Damon and Chris had just woven their own nooses. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and nerves. Rows of strangers filled the gallery, reporters with notepads, curious onlookers, and a few tech world insiders who clearly knew they were about to witness blood in the water. Damon and Chris sat at the defendant's table in matching dark suits, their expressions carefully blank. They looked like men who had practiced calm professionalism in the mirror for weeks. Too bad that act was about to crumble. The prosecution, my side, called Damon first. He adjusted his tie as he walked to the witness stand, projecting confidence. But under the harsh courtroom lights, even a polished man can sweat. Sloan didn't waste time. Mr. Carver, you testified under oath in your deposition that you were a co-creator of the original prototype. Is that correct? Yes, Damon said, steady. Sloan nodded, then walked to the evidence table. He lifted a slim folder and handed it to the clerk. Plaintiff's Exhibit 42. Can you read the creation date on that document for the jury? Damon's eyes flicked to the page. January 12th. And what's the date on your signed partnership agreement with my client? July 8th. The jurors were already looking at him differently. Mr. Carver, Sloan said, voice smooth as a scalpel, how exactly did you contribute to the creation of a prototype that existed 6 months before you met my client? Damon's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His lawyer objected. Overruled. The silence stretched until he muttered something about conceptual guidance. Sloan let him dangle. Then he pivoted to the emails. Every damning line we'd found in Discovery was now up on a massive screen for the jury to read. Once she's out, we can push launch without her approval. She's too naive to fight us. The jury wasn't just reading, they were frowning. Then came Chris. His composure was ice. Until Sloan hit the fake performance reports. Mr. Vance, you submitted these to investors claiming Ms. Hale failed to meet deadlines. Can you explain why the timestamps on the original files, which you emailed to her, show completion weeks ahead of schedule? Chris shifted in his seat. I can't speak to. Do you need help speaking to it? Sloan interrupted. Because your assistant testified under oath that you personally edited these dates before sending them out. Objection. Overruled. Sloan stepped closer. Mr. Vance, did you alter those reports to justify forcing my client out of her own company? The pause was deadly. Finally, Chris said, I don't recall. Sloan smiled the way a hunter smiles when the prey stops running. Let me help you recall, he said, clicking the remote. The projector lit up with a side-by-side comparison. My original reports versus his altered versions. The differences were highlighted in screaming red. It was the kind of visual that doesn't just tell the jury a story, it brands it into their minds. By the time Chris stepped down, he wasn't looking at the jury anymore. He was looking at the floor. Damon was glaring at him like maybe betrayal was contagious. And me? I was finally breathing easy. Because I knew this wasn't just going to end in a win. It was going to end in a public execution of their reputations. The jury was out for 6 hours. 6 hours of pacing the hallway outside the courtroom, sipping bad vending machine coffee, and trying not to replay every moment of the trial in my head. Sloan kept telling me the evidence was airtight, that the cross-examination had landed like a sledgehammer, but until that verdict was read, nothing felt certain. When the bailiff finally called us back in, my legs felt like they were made of wet cement. Damon and Chris were already at the defense table. Damon's face was stone, Chris kept rubbing the back of his neck like it was the only thing keeping him from snapping. The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, stood and held a folded piece of paper. The judge took it, scanned it quickly, and handed it back. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. My stomach dropped. In the matter of Hale v. Carver and Vance, on the claim of misappropriation of intellectual property, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The words hit me like a rush of cold air after being underwater too long. In the matter of breach of fiduciary duty, in favor of the plaintiff. Damon's jaw tightened. Chris didn't move. And on the matter of fraud, in favor of the plaintiff. The judge's voice was steady, almost bored, but every syllable felt like another nail driven into their coffin. Then came the part I wasn't sure I'd live to hear. We award compensatory damages to the plaintiff in the amount of $12 million, and grant transfer of full ownership rights to the disputed intellectual property. Full ownership. My company. My product. Mine again. The gallery buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously, someone audibly whispering, "Holy shit." Damon's lawyer leaned in to whisper something to him, but Damon just stared straight ahead, his knuckles white. Chris looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. When the judge dismissed the court, I didn't rush out. I packed my files slowly, deliberately, letting them feel my presence for just a few seconds longer. As I walked past their table, I leaned down just enough for only them to hear. You should have settled for peanuts. Neither of them replied. Outside, cameras flashed and microphones crowded toward me. I didn't give them the whole story, not yet. Just enough for the headlines. Inventor wins multi-million-dollar lawsuit against former partners. That night, I poured myself a glass of champagne in my apartment, the same cramped place where this whole nightmare started, and finally let myself breathe. It wasn't just victory. It was vindication. Winning in court was only the first half of the revenge. The verdict gave me my company back, my product back, and $12 million in damages, but it also gave me something far more valuable: control over the story. In business, reputations are currency. And I was about to bankrupt Damon and Chris. The morning after the verdict, I scheduled a press conference. It wasn't flashy, just a modest venue, a podium, and a dozen reporters who'd followed the case from day one. I stood there in a black blazer, no jewelry, no theatrics, and told the truth. Not the legal version. The real version. I talked about the nights I'd slept on my office floor, the hours I'd worked without pay, the trust I'd placed in the wrong people. I told them about the emails, the fake reports, the stolen schematics. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. By the end, every reporter in the room had the look of someone who couldn't wait to hit publish. Within 48 hours, the headlines were everywhere. Tech world shocked by corporate betrayal case. From theft to triumph, the woman who beat her backstabbers. Carver and Vance blacklisted after explosive trial. Sponsors pulled out of their other ventures. Deals evaporated overnight. Their LinkedIn profiles became graveyards of former titles. But I wasn't done. Using part of the damages, I relaunched my company, not just with the product, but with a new campaign that made it very clear who the real creator was. The ads featured the original napkin sketches, the timestamps, the photos of me soldering circuits at 3 a.m. The tagline was simple. Created by me. Stolen by them. Returned by justice. Sales exploded. My inbox flooded with offers from investors who wanted in, my kind of investors, the kind who respected the hands that actually built the thing. And the final touch? I bought the office space right next to Damon and Chris's old headquarters, the one they had to vacate after their business collapsed. I turned it into our flagship showroom, with a giant glass wall displaying the product they'd tried to steal. Every time I saw former colleagues walking past, glancing in, I'd smile. Because revenge isn't always about rage or even justice. Sometimes, it's about making sure that when your enemies look at what they lost, they know you're the one who took it back. And I wanted Damon and Chris to know that every time they saw my name in the news, every time they walked past my showroom, every time they Googled themselves and saw fraud next to their names. That was me. And I was still winning.